What we know matters less than what we can prove. He cocked the pistol. And you, Miss Colborne, are about to become a tragic casualty of a robbery gone wrong. The door behind Ashworth exploded inward. Wood splintered like matchsticks. One of his men flew backward, striking the far wall with a sound that made Marguerite's teeth ache. The second turned to fight and simply stopped. His body went rigid, then crumpled. Lord Damien Vane stood in the doorway, his pale features carved from something older than fury. His dark eyes fixed on Ashworth with an intensity that made the air itself grow cold. "You are in my home," he said quietly. "You are threatening my guest." Ashworth's hand trembled. The pistol wavered. "Vane, Lord Vane, this woman is a thief. She infiltrated your household under false pretenses. Ask her why she really came here." 3 months before, everything had begun with a letter and a lie. Marguerite Colborne had stood outside the gates of Thornhaven Estate, her single trunk beside her, her letter of introduction perfectly forged. She was 32 years old, a widow with nothing left to lose, and she had come to rob a monster. The letter claimed she was a translator of rare manuscripts, seeking temporary lodging while cataloging the Vane collection for the British Museum. The truth was simpler and uglier. Lord Ashworth had taken everything her family owned through forged debt contracts. The only evidence that could prove his fraud was locked somewhere in this estate. The vampire who owned Thornhaven had purchased Ashworth's original ledgers 15 years ago, part of a larger collection of financial documents he'd acquired from a bankrupt solicitor. Marguerite had spent 2 years tracing those ledgers. They contained Ashworth's handwriting samples from before he learned to properly forge her father's signature. Samples that would prove the shipyard contracts were fraudulent. She just had to find them before anyone realized who she really was. "Mrs. Colborne?" The butler's voice made her jump. He was ancient, impeccably dressed, and looked at her as though she were a slightly unusual beetle that had wandered onto the doorstep. "Lord Vane will see you in the library." The interior of Thornhaven smelled of cedar and something sweeter, jasmine perhaps, though the season was wrong for it. Candles burned in silver sconces along hallways paneled in dark wood. Portraits watched her pass with eyes that seemed to follow. Marguerite counted the doors as she walked. 14 on the left, 12 on the right. A habit from childhood, counting things when nervous. It helped her feel in control when nothing else did. The library doors opened onto a room that could have held her entire childhood home twice over. And she saw him. Lord Damien Vane stood by the far windows, his back to her, silhouetted against the dying light of a winter afternoon. Tall, lean, dressed in impeccable black. When he turned, she forgot to breathe. She knew him. 8 years ago, a masked ball in Vienna. She had been 24, recently married, desperately unhappy. He had asked her to dance, a stranger in a silver mask who moved as though music had been invented specifically for him. They had talked for hours. He had made her laugh for the first time in months. And at midnight, when the masks came off, she had looked away for one moment, and he had vanished. She had never learned his name, never forgotten his face. Now he stood before her with no recognition in his dark eyes, and something inside her cracked like thin ice. "Mrs. Colborne." He inclined his head. His voice was exactly as she remembered, low, slightly rough, like silk that had been worn soft with age. "The museum speaks highly of your translation work." "Lord Vane." She curtsied, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Thank you for agreeing to grant me access to your collection." It seemed a reasonable enough request. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Tell me about your scholarly interests." He did not remember her. Of course he didn't. He had lived centuries. She had been one dance, one conversation, one forgettable evening among thousands. The realization hurt more than it should have. "I specialize in medieval financial documents," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Account ledgers, debt records, contracts of sale." The museum believes your collection contains several significant examples from the 13th century. Significant examples. A faint smile touched his lips. How diplomatic. What you mean is that my collection contains documents the museum has coveted for decades and has finally found an excuse to examine. I wouldn't presume to characterize the museum's motives, my lord. No? You seem like someone who presumes quite readily when it suits her. She met his gaze directly. 17 doors in this hallway alone. 14 on the left, 12 on the right, plus the main entrance. Your household employs at least 4 servants who saw me enter, and your butler took exactly 43 seconds to decide whether I was worth admitting. If presuming means observing, then yes. I presume constantly. His features rearranged themselves in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or interest. You count things. It helps me think. And what are you thinking now, Mrs. Colborne? That you are exactly as I remember you. That I have dreamed of your voice for 8 years. That you are a vampire and a stranger, and I am here to betray you. I'm thinking that your collection will be fascinating to examine, she said, and that I am very grateful for your hospitality. The first week passed in a blur of documents and deception. Lord Vane had given her access to a small study adjacent to the main archive, along with a key that opened most, but not all, of the locked cases. She worked from dawn to dusk, cataloging manuscripts with one hand while searching for Ashworth's ledgers with the other. She found nothing. The collection was vast, meticulously organized, and entirely wrong. Financial documents from the 13th century, yes, from the 15th, the 17th, the 18th, but nothing from the period she needed, nothing that matched her information. You look frustrated. His voice came from directly behind her. She spun, scattering papers, and found him standing close enough to touch, pale and perfect, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You move very quietly, she said. A family trait. He bent to help her gather the scattered documents, and his fingers brushed hers. Cold. His skin was impossibly cold. What troubles you, Mrs. Colborne? Has my collection disappointed? Not at all. She pulled her hand back, pulse racing. I simply haven't found one particular type of document I was hoping to examine. English commercial ledgers from the early 1850s. Your solicitor's record suggested they might be here. Did they? His voice remained neutral, but something sharpened in his gaze. How curious that the British Museum would interest itself in such recent materials. Historical significance isn't always measured by age, my lord. No. He straightened, still holding several of her papers. It is measured by what someone is willing to do to obtain it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The ledgers you seek are not in this archive, he said finally. They are in my private study. I keep them there because I suspected someone would eventually come looking for them. Her blood turned to ice. I don't know what you... Lord Ashworth ruined your family 7 years ago using forged debt contracts, he said quietly. The original ledgers in my possession contain handwriting samples that would prove the forgery. You are not a translator, Mrs. Colborne, or rather, not only a translator. You are here for revenge. Marguerite's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against her skirts, forcing stillness. How long have you known? I suspected from the moment you walked through my door. Your letter of introduction was excellent, nearly perfect, but the museum's senior curator is a friend of mine, and he mentioned no expedition to catalog my collection. Then why allow me to stay? Something shifted in his expression, a softening she couldn't read. Because I remember a night in Vienna, he said softly. A woman who laughed as though she had forgotten she was allowed to. I have thought of that woman often. When she appeared at my gates 8 years later, carrying lies and desperation in equal measure, I wanted to know why. The ground tilted beneath her. You remembered me. I remember every moment of that night. He stepped closer, and she smelled cedar and cold stone, and something like midnight air. I left because I was afraid of what I might do if I stayed, what I might become to you, what you might become to me. A vampire, she whispered. You're a vampire. Yes, the syllable settled in the air like smoke. And Lord Ashworth? A human who has made powerful enemies by trafficking in the supernatural. He sells information about my kind to hunters, to governments, to anyone who pays. The ledgers in my possession were originally his brother's, a man who died mysteriously after discovering what Ashworth truly was. Then you'll help me. I will give you the ledgers. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was cool, impossibly gentle. But I need something from you first. Ashworth has been untouchable because no human witness will testify against him. Their families become targets. Their livelihoods disappear. But you have already lost everything. You have nothing left for him to take. You want me to testify publicly. I want you to help me destroy him. Not just recover your family's property, destroy him utterly so he can never harm another family again. She looked into his ancient, inhuman eyes and saw the same loneliness she felt reflected back at her. Yes, she said, I'll help you. The next month transformed everything. They worked together in his private study, a room filled with ledgers and legal documents and the accumulated evidence of Ashworth's decades of fraud. Marguerite translated and organized while Damien provided context, explaining which victims were still alive to testify, which financial institutions would verify discrepancies, which magistrates could be trusted. She learned that he had been hunting Ashworth for 15 years. She learned that her father had not been the first victim, merely one among dozens, and she learned that the vampire who had haunted her dreams was far more human than any man she had ever known. Why do you care? She asked one evening, as candlelight flickered over stacks of damning evidence. Ashworth's crimes are against humans. Why does a vampire concern himself with our affairs? Because I was human once. He didn't look up from the document he was examining. Because I remember what it felt like to lose everything. Because watching your kind suffer when I could prevent it makes my existence intolerable. How long have you been alive? 437 years. She absorbed this. And in all that time you've never... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Never what? Now he did look up, dark eyes meeting hers with devastating directness. Never found someone to share it with. I found someone once. His voice grew soft. In Vienna. But I was too afraid to stay. The air between them thickened. You're not afraid now? I am terrified. He rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. But I have learned that fear is no excuse for cowardice, and you, Marguerite Colborne, are worth being brave for. When he kissed her, she tasted eternity. The attack came 3 nights later. Marguerite was alone in the archive, cataloging the final evidence they needed, when the door burst open and Lord Ashworth strode in with 2 armed men. Did you think I wouldn't discover your little alliance? His handsome face twisted with rage. My informants are everywhere, even here. She backed toward the window, mind racing. Damien had gone to London to meet with the magistrate who would hear their case. He wouldn't return until morning. Those documents you're gathering will never see a courtroom. Ashworth advanced on her. You and your monster lover will disappear, and my business will continue exactly as it always has. Your business destroys families. My business makes me wealthy. The same thing, really. She grabbed the heavy candlestick from the desk and swung it at his head. He ducked, laughing, and his men seized her arms. The candlestick clattered to the floor. Feisty. I see why Vane likes you. Ashworth pulled the forged contracts from his coat pocket. The originals, the ones that had stolen her family's shipyards. I'll make you a final offer, Mrs. Colborne. Sign these new documents transferring any remaining claims to me, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and you'll be found dead in a ditch outside town. Tragic accident. Happens all the time. I would rather die than sign anything for you. That can be arranged. He nodded to his men, and they began dragging her toward the door. Outside, the estate grounds sprawled dark and silent. Rain began to fall, fat, cold drops that soaked through her dress within seconds. They forced her toward a waiting carriage, and she knew with terrible certainty that if she got inside, she would never leave it alive. She went limp. The men stumbled, unprepared for the sudden dead weight. She dropped to the muddy ground, rolled beneath the carriage wheels, and came up running. After her! The estate gates were too far. The house was behind them. She veered toward the old chapel at the edge of the grounds. Consecrated ground, she remembered suddenly. Vampires couldn't. But Damien wasn't here. And these men were human. She burst through the chapel doors and slammed them shut, throwing the iron bolt. Fists hammered against the wood. The door shuddered, but held. "You can't stay in there forever," Ashworth called. "My men will wait all night if they have to." Marguerite's legs gave out. She collapsed against the altar, rain and mud streaking her face, her entire body shaking. The chapel was cold and dark and smelled of ancient stone. She closed her eyes and waited. An hour passed. Then two. The hammering stopped. Voices murmured outside, urgent, afraid. Then running footsteps moving away. Then silence. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare hope. She stayed curled against the altar, counting her breaths. 467, 468, until the chapel doors exploded inward. Damien stood in the doorway, pale as death, his dark eyes blazing with something that might have been terror. "Marguerite. I'm here." Her voice came out as a croak. "I'm alive." He crossed to her in 3 long strides and gathered her into his arms. She was dimly aware that he was shaking, an immortal creature who had seen centuries of violence, trembling as he held her. "I returned early," he said against her hair. "I felt something wrong. When I found the archive destroyed, the evidence scattered." "The evidence." She pulled back. "Ashworth's men, they took it. All of it." His expression hardened. "Not all of it. I moved the most damning documents to a location Ashworth will never find. I suspected he might try something like this." "Then we can still—" "Yes, but first, we need to get you inside. You're soaked through, half frozen, and you've been out here for hours." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing and carried her across the grounds toward the house. His arms around her were impossibly strong, impossibly gentle. She pressed her face against his chest and let the rain wash her tears away. When they reached the entrance, the household staff stood waiting, the ancient butler, 2 maids, a footman with worried eyes. Damien carried her past them without a word. "My lord," the butler began, "no one enters this wing tonight." Damien's voice was ice and stone. "No one comes near her. Anyone who tries will answer to me personally." He carried her to a warm room she had never seen before. His private chambers, she realized distantly. A fire blazed in the hearth. He set her on the bed and began removing her sodden shoes, her ruined stockings, wrapping her in blankets so soft they felt like clouds. "You should rest," he said. "I should have been more careful." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "I led them right to us. They knew because Ashworth has spent 15 years building a network of informants." He cupped her face in his marble-cold hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "None of this is your fault. But the evidence will still destroy him. I promise you that." She leaned into his touch, exhausted, grateful, terrified. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Always," he said. "For as long as you want me." The trial took place 3 weeks later in a London courtroom packed with witnesses. Lord Ashworth sat at the defendant's table, his expensive solicitors arrayed around him like a protective wall. He looked confident, the same smug assurance he had worn when he destroyed her family, when he sent his men to drag her into the rain. That confidence would not survive the next hour. Marguerite rose when the magistrate called her name. She wore black, widow's weeds, though her husband had died years ago, and she carried a leather satchel filled with documents. Mrs. Colborne, the magistrate said, you have brought serious allegations against Lord Ashworth: forgery, fraud, intimidation of witnesses. Do you have evidence to support these claims? I do, Your Honor. She opened the satchel. The next hour was methodical destruction. She presented the original ledgers showing Ashworth's handwriting before he learned to forge signatures properly. She presented testimony from 12 victims who had finally agreed to speak publicly, knowing they were protected by forces Ashworth couldn't touch. She presented financial records proving that the debt contracts her father had supposedly signed were dated before the debts themselves existed. And finally, she presented Ashworth's own private correspondence, letters he had written to his brother describing exactly how he planned to defraud the Colborne family. Where did you obtain these letters? Ashworth's solicitor demanded. From the estate of Lord Damien Vane. Marguerite's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. Who purchased them from a solicitor's estate 15 years ago? The solicitor in question was Ashworth's brother, who died under mysterious circumstances shortly after attempting to expose his siblings' crimes. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ashworth rose, his face purple with rage. This is a conspiracy. This woman is the lover of a known vampire. She has been manipulated, deceived. Lord Ashworth, the magistrate's voice cut through like a blade. You will be silent, or you will be removed. Your Honor, I must protest. The evidence presented is overwhelming and unambiguous. The magistrate shuffled papers, his expression cold. Lord Ashworth, you are found guilty of forgery, fraud, and the systematic destruction of no fewer than 47 families over the past 3 decades. Your assets are forfeit. You will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. The courtroom erupted. Marguerite stood motionless at the witness stand, watching as bailiffs dragged Ashworth away. He screamed curses at her, at Damien, who sat quietly in the gallery, but his voice faded as the doors closed behind him. It was over. She walked out of the courtroom on legs that felt like water, and Damien was there, waiting for her in the corridor. You were magnificent, he said softly. I was terrified. Those are not mutually exclusive states. She laughed, a wet, broken sound, and let him pull her into his arms. Around them, reporters shouted questions, witnesses clustered to offer congratulations, solicitors discussed next steps in urgent tones. She heard none of it. What happens now? She murmured against his chest. Now your family's property is restored. The shipyards return to you. The other victims receive compensation from Ashworth's seized assets. I meant. She pulled back to look at him. What happens to us? His dark eyes softened. That depends entirely on what you want. I want to stop running. The words came easily, as though she had been waiting years to say them. I want to stop counting exits and escape routes. I want to build something instead of always looking for ways to tear things down. And if building something means building it with a vampire who will outlive you by centuries, then I want that too. He kissed her forehead, cold lips against her flushed skin, gentle as a prayer. I cannot promise you forever, he said. I cannot offer you the transformation that would make us equals in time. That choice is too great for any first moment, any early declaration. I'm not asking for forever. She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, memorizing the impossible smoothness. I'm asking for today, and tomorrow, and every day after that, until we decide, together, what comes next. You are asking me to trust that this will be enough. I'm asking you to be brave. She smiled up at him, the first real smile she had worn in years. You said I was worth being brave for. Prove it. He laughed, a sound like bells in winter air. Marguerite Colborne, he said, you are utterly terrifying. I know. 14 solicitors and 43 reporters are watching us right now, and I don't care even slightly. 44 reporters. You counted. I learned from the best. She kissed him there in the courthouse corridor, surrounded by witnesses and scandal, and the wreckage of the man who had destroyed her family. His arms wrapped around her, cold and strong and infinitely gentle, and she felt, for the first time in 7 years, like she was finally home. 6 months later, the Colborne shipyards launched their first new vessel under the restored family ownership. Marguerite stood on the dock beside Damien, watching the great ship slide into the water. The hull gleamed with fresh paint, and the figurehead, carved at her specification, depicted a woman with her face turned toward the horizon. "The Victoria Marguerite," she read from the banner stretched across the dock. "My mother would have laughed. She would have been proud. She would have asked why I named a ship after myself instead of her." Workers moved around them, securing ropes and checking equipment. The shipyard hummed with activity, more activity than it had seen in a decade. 3 new contracts had been signed since the trial, and 2 more waited on her desk back at the office. "I received an interesting letter this morning," Damien said. "From whom?" "The Vampire Court of Europe. They've requested a formal audience." Marguerite raised an eyebrow. "Do vampires have courts?" "We have bureaucracy like everyone else. Apparently, my very public association with a human has caused some concern." "Concern that you'll reveal their secrets?" "Concern that you'll civilize me." He smiled faintly. "They believe I've grown too human, too attached to your world." "And what will you tell them?" He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes warm despite their inhuman nature. "I will tell them that I found what I've been searching for during 4 centuries of breathing, that she counts doors when she's nervous and quotes legal precedent when she's angry, that she is braver than any creature I've ever met, living or dead." "That's quite a speech." "I've been practicing." A gust of salt wind caught her hair, carrying the smell of tar and fresh timber, an endless possibility. 17 ships, she said. "What?" "In the harbor right now. 17 ships. I counted while you were being romantic." He laughed. That sound she had first heard in Vienna 8 years ago, the sound that had stayed with her through marriage and loss, and years of planning revenge. "You are impossible," he said. "I'm efficient." She took his cold hand in her warm one. "And we have a dinner meeting with the harbor master in 43 minutes. So unless you want to scandalize him by arriving late." 43 minutes is plenty of time. He kissed her there on the dock, surrounded by workers and ships and the evidence of everything they had built together. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the water gold and crimson, and somewhere in the distance a bell was tolling the hour. She had come to his estate to steal from him. She had stayed to fight beside him. And now, standing in the midst of her restored legacy, she understood that some things could not be counted or catalogued or contained in ledgers. Some things simply were. The ship's horn sounded as the Victoria Marguerite reached open water. Marguerite watched it go, Damien's hand still wrapped around hers, and felt the last knot of old pain finally unravel in her chest. 42 minutes, she said. 41, he corrected. They walked together toward the carriage, 2 impossible people who had chosen each other against all odds, leaving the harbor filled with the sound of bells and waves and the beginning of everything yet to come.